can't heal trauma. It's stuff that already happened. But what you can heal is the way that it has affected you.
Born in 92 on the block with the sharks. Come from a different cloth, y'all would get ripped apart. You want it diamond, then you gotta get it in the dark. We dropping nuggets like Carmelo went to Rucker Park. Now we eating from state to state, we scrape the plate. I put my eggs in a basket, took a leap of faith. I took a chance, now we grow and see the impact. Decoding success with special guests, now let's bring Matt.
Welcome to the Decoding Success Podcast, top 1% globally ranked show. Thanks to you, the individual that tunes into this. Whether you are the person that views this or listens to this going through a dark time and you rely on this for the inspiration or that little glimmer of hope or that little glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel, or maybe you're on the flip side and you're like, I'm on that high wave and I just want to keep it going and I just want to tune in here. We are grateful that you are tuned into this episode. We have a super special guest joining us, but before introducing her, very lighthearted individual. I'm smiling just thinking about the fun we've been having here, but I want to just put something on your mind and on your heart. There's so many podcasts out in this world. If you've returned to listen to the show, you've heard me say this, but if you're new, this might be the first time you're hearing this. There are so many podcasts in this world, but you are here. You are listening to not just this podcast, but this episode. We have 330 plus episodes. You could be listening to any of them, plus the 300 or maybe the 3 million podcasts that are out in this world, but you are here. Whether you're on YouTube or you're listening to this on the go, on Spotify or Apple, wherever, you're here. And I just want to make sure that you know the power within that, because you could be doing anything else in this world, but there's a reason that you've been guided here. And I just want you to open your mind and open your heart to that. And there is something within this episode. Maybe it's a golden nugget that our incredible guest is going to drop, or maybe it's just something that sparks in your mind and it's like, hey, this person really needs to hear this. Maybe you need to share this episode with someone. So I'm putting that on your mind and on your heart in the beginning, just right out of the gate. And with that being said, we are joined by an incredible individual. You might know her as the fairy, the crappy childhood fairy. Millions follow her work on social. YouTube is so good. I just let her know that I fell asleep listening to her. I woke up at like 5 a.m. and the videos were still rolling. Millions take her courses and so much more. She's also the author of the brand new book that just launched, Re-Regulated, Set Your Life Free from Childhood PTSD and Trauma-Driven Behaviors That Keep You Stuck. And even beyond the bio stuff, I just mentioned she's so lighthearted, former comedian. I'm sure we're going to have a ton of laughs. You got to be in store for that. Today, we are joined by my friend, Anna Runkle. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have you. I'm so grateful for just the way that we've been chopping it up before this. Like, you're just so down to earth and it's like so comforting. So
Yeah.
I'm really, really excited to have you. But I know you're in New York for a little bit, but like, how are you? What's going on?
It's good. My book came out just 3-4 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So it's been this kind of whirl of opportunities and excitement and appearances.
Yeah.
And I did a retreat in North Carolina right where the flood happened to happen. We booked it in advance. So I got to experience the incredible natural beauty and a lot of people who were so incredibly traumatized.
Yeah.
And who had a chance to like get some rest and focus on healing with me. And it was a lovely thing. And then straight to Manhattan.
Well, there's a lot of trauma in Manhattan, I'll tell you that.
It's a place that gives me a lot of energy, though. I've always absolutely loved New York. People always told me I would. My mother's from Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And so when I got to New York for the first time, I was just like, my people.
Yeah.
Because I live in California. Different vibe.
I feel like, you just hit on something so beautiful. You're like, it gives you energy. Mm-hmm. And I agree with that wholeheartedly, but like when you actually live in that energy, it's probably even more important to make sure that you're regulating yourself, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That they don't call the city that never sleeps like it does. It gets me quite agitated.
Yeah.
And because I have this twice a day daily practice, I met with a friend who also does the daily practice last night out in Queens.
Yeah.
She made us dinner and we began our evening by sitting down and writing and meditating in the way we do.
That's
my
so
technique.
cool.
Mm-hmm.
That's so cool. It's important to be surrounded by people that like support those practices, right? I mean, just like...
Yeah, and she's done it for years, and she's just so good to be around for me. When several people are using the same technique to get their nervous system re-regulated, we're not like calling it, let's get our nervous systems re-regulated.
Yeah.
We do it because if we don't do it, we go nuts.
Yeah.
We get overwhelmed and crazy, and many of the people who do it, have addictions and just all the symptoms of trauma that come out. You know, popping off, losing your temper, walking around all the time, like in a perpetual state of road rage when you're driving or walking.
I had a little bit of that on my way here. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
I did. I definitely had a little bit. Are we going to be able to dive into some of those techniques today?
Yeah, I'll talk about them. They're a little deeper than I can teach like right here, right
Yeah.
now, but I can show you what they are, and they're easy to learn. And
That would be awesome.
Yeah,
That would be a super awesome treat. Well, like I said, I'm really, really glad you're here. Going back to the Manhattan thing, right? Like the energy, like I understand, like, yes, we definitely need to make sure that we're regulating ourselves, but I'm curious, how do you find the balance of feeding off of that energy? Because it is a positive, right? I think there's definitely a positive to it, at least from my perspective. Finding the balance to taking the positive side of that, but also making sure that it's not like consuming us in like a negative way. Do you think balance exists in that regard?
I think balance is like a concept, but I've always found it easier said than done. And they're like, you need work-life balance. It's like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea, but how do you do that? And I think that like your right set point, which is a little different for everybody, of like how much intensity and how much downtime.
Yeah.
Everybody's a little different. You have to be very attuned to yourself to kind of know when you're overdoing it one way or the other. And I think that's a lot what healing from trauma actually involves, is becoming much more attuned. You know, when you have less noise in your own head, you start to become attuned. It's like, you know what, I need to lie down, or it's time to go look for a job, or the little inner voice knows what to do, or this person's not safe, or you know, actually this would be a good person for me to date. And you know, that stuff, it just gets washed away by the noise in your head, because early abuse and neglect causes something that you could call an injury to your nervous system. That makes it really hard to be attuned to yourself or to read the room. Very hard to read other people too.
So are you essentially saying that the inner voice, really that guidance system that we all have, is essentially like turned off, or like the volume is turned down because of trauma?
Yeah. You know, I get to talk to people who have what I have a lot, which is great, because I learn a lot of people's experience with it. And a lot of people call it like, it's like Wi-Fi that you don't have the password to, you know, like what's going on at this party? Who's friends? Is it appropriate to tell a joke here?
Yeah.
You know, that kind of thing. And so some people call it like that, and some people say they feel like they're inside of a invisible membrane, and they can't really ever connect with anybody. The feeling of not being able to connect or to feel disconnected from other people seems almost universal for traumatized people, and of course for some other people too, but I'm working on my second book right now, which is about that connection wound from trauma and how to break out of it in a way that works for traumatized people.
Yeah, that's so awesome. I mean, working on a second book, and the first one just released, like that, you're on the grind.
I got a 2-book contract with Hay House in the summer of 2023.
Okay.
It's the most exciting phone call I ever got. It was so great.
That is so awesome.
Yeah.
How do you know, it's always amazing to me as a podcast host, just like sitting here and having conversations with authors like yourself, like first book being published into the world, like how do you really take the time to embrace the beauty in that, like without looking at it as like a completed goal? Like what did you do to like really bask in and be like, wow, like I just birthed this into the world, you know?
To be honest, I almost did nothing.
I hear that a lot. That's why I'm asking. Yeah.
It's a lot of work, and it's not over yet, you know? So it's like, it's the birth isn't done, you know? It's a lot going on. And then, you know, I'm watching the reviews stack up on Amazon.
That's super cool.
And then people, you know, because the book is out in the world, I'm getting phone calls from unusual quarters. I got asked to speak at a national conference on homelessness, and I'm like, I got to think about that. Wow. Just all these really interesting opportunities come to you when you have a book.
Yeah.
And I knew I wanted that again. But I've been trying to write the book for 30 years. You know, when I first started healing, it wasn't long after that I was like, I should have a book. I need to explain this. I was just running around explaining it one-on-one to people. I healed so quickly, so suddenly, right when I thought I was unhelpable. And so I was showing people, and my life used to be like half my waking hours were just sharing it with people, helping them. And it turned out to be, a good idea professionally, but it used to compete. I was like a single mom. I had 2 kids, and I was always running. People were calling me all the time, trying to get some help with what they were going through. I didn't even know what I was helping us with.
Yeah.
It was just like, I don't know, we're kind of effed up. And 10 years ago, the literature came out that there's this thing called complex PTSD.
Yeah.
And it has this core symptom called dysregulation. And when I heard that, my whole life clicked, and that was that.
What does healing mean to you?
Well, it's a lot of things. When it comes to complex PTSD, when it comes to just about everything, I'll tell you, I've had like serious medical problems before, in and out of the hospital for years, and surgeries that weren't working. I've had a lot of experience there. I've had emotional healing. I've had cognitive healing. I've overcome stress-related illnesses that I didn't know were stress-related. I used to have asthma, back pain, my knees. They said I'd never run again. So a lot of things I overcame, but this is kind of how I see it now. I think we're designed to heal. Like if you go scrape your elbow,
it's going to scab up.
Yeah, but you don't know how to heal an elbow.
Yeah.
You don't know how to do that. This is also sort of how I explain why I believe in God. Like you don't know, but you are designed to heal.
Mm-hmm.
You are designed to heal. Your skin knows what to do. And also, part of our progression is we get old and die. That's true. But along the way, there's a whole lot of healing that happens. Your body is always self-repairing. And even from a strictly physical point of view, your complex PTSD symptoms, and I'll talk more about that, but they're physical, they're cognitive, they're emotional, they're in your hormones, they're in your immune system, they're in your behaviors, they're in your, just the things that you believe about the world. It's all these different levels that it's on. And I've sort of ended up having the experience that led to me basically believing like we're designed to come back to some ideal state, and that our whole bodies, our whole beings are sort of always inclining towards that whole state. Obviously, we're never in a state of perfection, but we keep coming towards that good state. And so that's how I understand it. And the techniques I learned are very much about getting fearful, resentful thinking out of the head and heart, at least for a little while. You get them on paper. Sometimes they come back. But the more you have time where you're not completely oppressed and suppressed by all these experiences, memories, thoughts, feelings, the more you have a capacity to experience real life right now, good and bad, get yourself out of danger, pursue an opportunity, love and be loved, get ideas, start a company, do a podcast, switch to video on, all of that. Those are all steps that each of us take because of the good state, because of that inclination towards our whole state. And I also believe that people are born with gifts that are meant to be shared with other people. And we're so lucky if we find what they are, because it's very fulfilling. It's stressful. It doesn't always pay well, you know. Sometimes it does, but sometimes the gift has nothing to do with the work for money.
Yeah.
And so happiness and healing come with sort of stepping into who you really are.
I love that.
In every dimension, yeah.
That's powerful. I want to talk about the elbow analogy, right?
Yeah.
Like you scrape your elbow, right? And essentially with time, it heals, right?
Yeah.
Without us like having to do anything, maybe you put a little ointment, bacitracin, whatever people put on cuts these days. Is it safe to say time heals emotional wounds, or
Sometimes.
sometimes?
I guess that you're kind of helping me frame, like, trauma is this thing that's basically like getting dirt and bacteria in a wound.
Yeah.
Your body can only do so much. Trauma is like that. It's an invader. It's something that's disrupting your nervous system. And I've never bought into that phrase, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Like, go walk around the street of any major city, and clearly that's not true.
Yeah.
They haven't been made stronger, and they're still living.
Yeah.
Has a lot to do with trauma. So there things can happen that can disrupt our ability to heal. So in a perfect world, we would all, be able to have a safe place from things that, getting abused, getting attacked, victims of violence. And it's never going to be a perfect world. So the second best thing is that as people who are fairly strong right now, we try to help other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me like time is really more so a catalyst in more situations than not, right? Because like sometimes I understand time can heal, but like others, right? It sounds like time is really the vehicle, and it sounds like the practices that you do and things of that sort are really what helps you quote unquote heal.
Yeah, I think, I don't like technology and analogies for everything like rewire your brain. There are no wires,
Yeah.
it's like actual cells, blood. It's you, it's your body. But I think, I think time, you're making me think here.
Well, I'm glad we're
Yeah,
thinking.
I know. We got to think here. We're going to have some original thought. The thing is, if you don't heal, if you have what I have, which is, like trauma-driven behaviors, and you just let them roll for the rest of your life. I mean, we all know people like that. If it's not like ending in some kind of addiction and destitution, it's those, like in your neighborhood, did you have them, like the angry old people? They're just
Still
really,
have 'em.
they're unreasonable, they're angry at kids for being in front of them on the sidewalk,
Yep.
It's just like you can get worse over time.
Yeah.
And so that's the risk here. And that's why people having this is one reason why I felt very compelled that I think there are some major misunderstandings about what trauma is and what the solution is. And until I was 30 years old, I was trying what society says to do if you're struggling in a trauma-like way. I didn't know exactly it was trauma that was causing my problems, but, I was depressed, I was anxious, I was having shitty boyfriends and very upset all the time. And they just were like, let's talk about it. Let's talk about your mom. Let's talk about her drinking. Like for years. And more and more people are knowing that's probably not going to get you out of it.
Yeah. Hey everyone, pausing this episode to share something with you. In a world of hyper competitiveness, I think the best quote that I can share with you is that there is no one in the world youer than you, and that is truer than true, which is exactly why I wanted to share with you today about Brand Builders Group. It's an organization I've been working with over the last few months. It is absolutely incredible, and today I am sharing with you the opportunity to hop on a free brand call with a brand strategist to help you break through the wall of obscurity. We are in a hyper competitive space at the moment, whether it be on social or with your podcast or with your blog or with your books or getting on stage. No matter what your endeavor is, this is an opportunity for you to hop on a free strategy call with someone from the team to be able to help you navigate the waters of making sure that you are breaking through the wall and taking advantage of all of the opportunities that you most definitely deserve. Again, there is no one in the world youer than you. So no matter what the problem is that you solve, there might be other people that are out there that also solve the same problem, but there is a strategy that can be placed into your initiatives that will help you break through that wall with speed. So I want to share this with you. It is freebrandcall.com/Matt Labrie. That is going to be in the show notes of this episode, whether you're tuned in from audio or through YouTube, whatever it is, freebrandcall.com/Matt Labrie. I want to try and give you my take on what trauma is.
Yeah.
I am not qualified to really I think I've had it, right? Maybe I still do in ways. I like to define it, and I'm really stealing this from someone, from a gentleman who I'll give credit to after, but I've been classifying trauma as just an overwhelming life experience.
Okay. Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What would you add to it?
Well, I think trauma is like a thing that happens to you.
Mm-hmm.
And then I talk a lot about what I call childhood PTSD. Now, I'm not a therapist or doctor, so I am very careful to say, yeah, well, people call that complex PTSD. It's an injury to your nervous system that happens as a result of trauma. So we're kind of like, I would be a stickler and say, you can't heal trauma. It's stuff that already happened. But what you can heal is the way that it has affected you. And so so you always need a word for that. I call it childhood PTSD. It's a colloquial word. I feel like everybody basically knows what I'm talking about, but when, we're just still like held back by it. And there is a common symptom cluster. That's kind of the new thing in the past 10 years.
Yeah.
There's a way it shows up in a lot of people, and most of us had no idea that these were trauma symptoms. And once you know that you're having a normal set of symptoms, for somebody who went through what you went through, there's this huge relief. You know, you're not a bad person. You're not self-sabotaging on purpose or something. You're not trying to recreate your childhood. There's like an injury going on to you that causes your thinking to like skip over something. Your reasoning goes down. Your emotions go up under stress. And it's like amazingly the same across people. So it really changes our understanding. The trouble is, talking about what happened isn't all, I think everybody needs to. We need that validation. We need to tell the truth. But like that old model where you would just go every week and talk about it for years could really do more harm than good.
Yeah.
You can't change it. And it can be really re-triggering of all the symptoms. It can make all your symptoms activate.
Yeah. I did talk therapy. So when my parents got divorced, I don't know, I was in like 5th or 6th grade. And, you know, by whatever, you know, I was told to go to therapy, and I would just go and count the books on the guy's shelf and really never pay attention to them. But then at 27, I went back, and initially, for me personally, talk therapy was beneficial because it was 27 years of carrying around the weight that was never discussed.
Yeah.
But like you're saying, at a certain point, it was just like, well, what am I showing up for? You know, like there was nothing more being done. It was just like, we're not, you know, I'm coming here and I'm expressing myself, and like nothing was happening. Right. You know, and I think a lot of people experience that. And I think that's why, like, they think, personally, the therapist I work with now, I want her around my life forever.
Yeah.
You know, like it's a great experience because it's much deeper than just like the talk stuff. But I think a lot of people experience that, where they try it and it's like, oh, well, I said everything I needed to say. Now it's over.
Yeah. There's that like really misleading scene in Good Will Hunting. I know it's
Good
really
reference.
It's really precious to a lot of people, that scene where Robin Williams says to Matt Damon, "It's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault." And he has a breakthrough, and like 2 seconds later, he's driving to California in the sunset with Minnie Driver.
Yeah.
Like, if only it were that easy.
Yeah.
But really, like, it is important to understand that what happened to you is not your fault. But you're left with this like life full of problems that have been generated over many years, and like changing your life. It's now possible because you know how to re-regulate your mind. My whole book's called Re-Regulated.
Yeah.
It's about the incredible power of being able to re-regulate your nervous system and your thinking and all the parts of your body that need to be re-regulated. And from there, like, that's the level playing field. And, you know, all my life, I used to work in like nonprofits and stuff. They'd be like, we're going to level the playing field. We're going to empower people. We're going to invest in schools. We're going to do all this stuff. And that's all great. But the playing field is like having a nervous system that can operate. That's it. Like, you can't really benefit from talk therapy or, you know, help at school, or, you know, you're going to ruin a marriage no matter how great the person is if you cannot self-regulate.
That's so interesting, right? It's like, what is the destruction? In a way, is it like unconscious self-sabotage?
I don't think it is. I think that's one of the judgy things that people have said when they looked at the way we behave. You're just unconsciously self-sabotaging. And a lot of us have sort of like accepted that. But in my own healing, part of what I've had to heal is a lot of sort of like wrong thinking that I inherited from the zeitgeist of, you know, they said, you just want to recreate your childhood. You know, if I kept having like dumb relationships, you're just trying to recreate your childhood. And I think, okay, if you say that, I will try to make myself believe that. But I'm finally free to go, of course I wasn't trying to recreate my childhood. I work really hard to have a better life than I grew up in.
Yeah.
You know, like, I'm sure some people self-sabotage. But here's a really like specific example of it. The way they figured out how broadly early trauma can affect people, one of the key moments in that was something called the ACE study. Have you heard about that?
Yes, I have. You referenced it in a video I saw last night too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So for a long time, I think less so these days, but for a long time, that's been like the reference of like, see, it was very important historically because, so Vincent Felitti from Kaiser Permanente, Robert Anda from the Centers for Disease Control, they ran this study, and this was in the 90s. where they were trying to figure out, they were specifically looking at a clinic for women who were morbidly obese, and they were doing some sort of extreme diet or food control thing, and they would lose a great deal of weight. And in almost every case, they would hit some sort of magic point, and all of a sudden, they would just gain the weight back. And they were trying to understand, why would anybody self-sabotage like that? What's happening? And so first, they went on the assumption that people were self-sabotaging. And because that's, if you don't have whatever those women were having, you would just have to look at it from the outside and based on your experience and think, oh, that must be self-sabotage. And they asked 1,000 questions about their lifestyle. What do you eat? Did you ever take birth control? How many people lived in your house as a kid? Did you, And it just ended up kind of random compared to the rest of the population. But one thing popped up as a huge correlation. 80% of them had been sexually abused, of morbidly obese women. 80%, like that's a lot. And rarely in research are you going to find something so definite as that. And so that was a really important finding, that sexual abuse had some kind of a correlation with morbid obesity in at least some cases, quite a few probably. But then they assumed further, they said they're just trying to cover their bodies so no one will look at them sexually. I'm like, there you go again. That's what you would think, Yeah. But it turns out that that sexual abuse, many kinds of abuse, but especially sexual abuse, can have a profound effect on endocrine function, your hormones, including the way that you metabolize food, including the way that your body responds to insulin. So all of this is like research is just emerging, and nothing is quite definite enough to say, but just like, let's just consider that. It causes endocrine disruption. I mean, girls who are sexually abused will go into puberty earlier. There are serious physical changes that happen as a result of abuse. So we can't just treat it as merely psychological or self-sabotaging. A girl who goes into puberty at 8 is not self-sabotaging, even though that's going to probably not be good for her safety in the world when a little child is sexually attractive,
Yeah.
It's not helpful to her. And so we have to like step back and always like think again, like why do people struggle with things? If you go into like people who are incarcerated, the rate of trauma is 100%. Particularly like men in prison have an extremely high history of being beaten by their fathers. And girls with a high rate of unintended pregnancy have a very high rate of not having a father present. There are just things like this that it's so interesting. It's tragic, but interesting because everything's been turned on its head about what we understand. And I've always sort of looked at this, why do girls who are 15 have babies, which I think happens a lot less than it used to 20 years ago, but I used to work in that field. And I would question that. They go, they just want somebody to love. And I go, hold on. And first of all, unintended pregnancy is hugely correlated with history of trauma. And why is that? Somebody to love, that's like kind of making fun of a person or something, like they're foolish. And there's a couple things you could look at with that. And one is, and this is just my own research, just so anybody can take it with a grain of salt, but I've noticed this, that, well, first of all, a traumatized kid and this is research, under stress, somebody who had a high stress childhood, under stress, which would be like, I'm about to have sex with somebody and there's no condom, right? Stress, very like high stress hormones. That creates changes in brain function where can't reason, lots of emotion. That's just like a perfect cocktail setup to get pregnant accidentally. So there's a lot of things that are happening for people that don't happen in the ideal way. It's like having a scraped elbow that's constantly getting dirt in it and trying to heal your arm, and you can't. And everybody's like, that must be because you don't want your arm healed. Or you get migraines. It's like, oh, you want migraines. No, it just happens. It's a natural consequence of things not quite working properly. But the other thing, and this is kind of like, just for the record, there's a lot of evidence that for kids who have children at 15, compared to if you match everything socioeconomically in the background with people who wait 5 more years, there's practical reasons why having a kid at 15 might be better for them. If in your life you're probably not going to get a great job. You're probably not going to go to college. Having that baby when there's a lot of social support for raising a baby, you come out a little better. I'm not promoting it or anything. Just saying this was the first time I just realized like everything's full of assumptions about why people do something that appears self-sabotaging. We can't assume. Something's going on, but it's not always what you think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that, right? Because like where I was going with it, it's like I hear everything you're sharing. There are obviously some like uncontrollables in that, right? Like the migraines. We don't really control if we get a migraine or not. I don't know. Maybe we do have a little bit more power over it. I don't know.
A little.
But right, like the migraine, the bodily reaction to trauma, my mind goes to, okay, maybe that's not something you can control, but on the flip side, who you enter a relationship with, that is something you can control a little bit more, which is why I had said, like, is there in a way some form of like unconscious sabotage, right? You get where I'm going with that?
I do. And it's something I've had to ask myself all my life because I've had some really disastrous relationships twice with guys who ended up having heroin addiction.
Yeah.
One was sober when we got together and relapsed. One was hiding it. Both of them died.
Yeah.
And it was terrible consequences for my life. And luckily, neither of them terribly serious. I wasn't married to them. I didn't have children with them. But horrifying feeling. And one of them, I found him. And I remember I had to call 911. I was doing CPR. I didn't know. I was so like freaked out. I wasn't sure. He was already gone. And it took 20 minutes. The cops arrived. And first they had to just figure out, did I do this? And I was like, it was really one of these, like, what's a person like me doing in this situation? And I could hardly explain it. And this is one of the things that really propelled me to need to write this book, because having solved this problem for myself at last, I mean, I went through my whole life judged, put down, for a lot of those choices choices I was making. We say choices we were making, but I do feel like I wasn't quite understanding the choice I was making. The information couldn't get through to me. I had a master's degree and I chose a guy like that. I had a lot of reasons why you would think I could do better.
Do you feel like those choices were made just due to I can never say this word, familiarity?
Yeah, familiarity. Yeah,
that word I can never say.
We know it so well. I think it'd be foolish to say not at all. There was a lot of that in my family.
Yeah.
And before I understood that there was a neurological injury I was working with, this is what I could say about it. Well, I was really kind of ashamed of my past mistakes. I was working really hard to get my life together. By that time, I had children. I was a divorced mom of 2 kids. I was very invested in trying to keep my life together and also be understood by others to have my life together. Like if you date somebody who has a heroin problem, guess what? Nobody will play with your kids. And there are terrible consequences.
Yeah.
And so I was really affected on every level by this. And in a way, it was a mercy that he died, because it happened so fast between when I realized that's what was going on, this quiet addiction going on, and then I tried to break up with him over it, and then he did this thing. It was, and then, for 2 years, it took me like 2 years to come up for air from the pain of that, from the horror. And of course, my kids were affected by my grief, even though he had not been in my life very much. And people couldn't understand, so they would be like, is that just familiar to you? And it's like, well, I guess, and I'm just saying this was my rationalization. I felt really bad about past mistakes. My first marriage, although this is the father of my kids, we're friends now. We had a really horrible marriage. And it's embarrassing to have a horrible marriage. It's embarrassing. People don't really want to hang around people who are having a horrible marriage. And so then it's like, well, maybe, I don't know, maybe somebody, just when I found out after months that he had been high all the time, maybe I did like his mellow energy or something. Maybe the way he didn't judge me because he had so much to judge about him that he secretly knew. I don't know. But see, that it never resonates quite as true as... Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Can I just say it's a mystery why we do the things we do?
I think just accepting what you just shared, right? It's like,
Yeah.
hey, like there doesn't always have to be an answer for everything.
Yeah.
You know, you just gave me the chills, literally. Can
Yeah.
you see? I literally have the
Oh,
chills.
yeah, your hair is standing up.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. Like I think that is
Yeah.
something that especially people, like if someone is watching this or listening to this right now, they vibe with the energy, like the things we're
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah.
And we could get really caught up in trying to figure everything out.
Right.
And it's like, hey, like, does everything need to be figured out?
It's nice to try every now and then,
Yeah.
but the thing that matters more than anything is that you notice what's going on with you. What are the problems you're having right now, and how can you start to change that? Whether or not you ever find out what happened, whether or not the people who abused you ever acknowledge it or apologize. Like most people, we're never going to get that,
Yeah.
and we can heal anyway. But the healing it makes huge headway when you go, okay, like since I just talked about the terrible choice of relationships as one of my trauma symptoms, and you could really look at my chaotic. I grew up in a commune, people sleeping with everybody all over the floor, and my dad was gone, and my dad then died when I was 15, and all kinds of things that you could explain it. But what are we going to do about that?
Yeah.
We can't take that back. But so I can just go, well, the thing is, I seem to make a really big error in judgment early when I get to know somebody, where I think it's going to turn out great. And then I can't get out when it doesn't turn out great, which shows up pretty fast, like usually in a day. You go, oh my God, what have I done?
Yeah. I know that you said that you have a belief in God, so I feel comfortable asking you this question. It's going to be a little bit of a spiritual one, but
Are you a God person?
I have "In God I Trust" tattooed across my chest. Yeah.
Okay.
For the first time ever yesterday, I shouldn't have done this, but I did. Like I was on a client call and I'm talking with my client and he asked me a similar question. He's like, "Are you a follower of Christ?" And without answering verbally, I literally like pulled down my shirt and showed him my tattoo. And he was like, "All right, yeah, I know you are now." I was like, I probably shouldn't have done that in a professional setting. But I did. I did. So
I won't do it to you.
We're not that type
There's
of show.
a picture for everyone.
That's great. I've asked this question a couple times and I'm just always curious what people think, right? I don't ask this because there's a right or wrong answer. It's just like, I want to know what you believe. Do you feel that everyone is meant to heal in this lifetime?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I do. I do feel that we're created, and that I do. I teach people who believe in God, who don't believe in God, who are totally damaged by the way religious people treated them. So I always really want to just put the precursor out there. I've come to believe in God as a result of my healing, and I'm so comfortable that everybody is wherever they are in their belief and healing and everything. So. And sometimes because I'm on a podium, or here I am at a microphone, I seem to have this authority. And, with great humility, I just want to say my experience is, yes.
Yeah.
That was one of the great spiritual awakenings I had as soon as I started using this technique. Within a couple of weeks, I had a profound experience, because when I hit bottom with my trauma symptoms, and again, I didn't know what they were. This is 30 years ago. I wanted to die. I had a plan. I was in a very, very bad place. And I was shown this very simple writing technique, and it was suggested I meditate afterwards. And my friend said, "Call me up, read to me what you wrote when you're ready." And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But I started doing it very regularly, and it very quickly started to change me in ways that I didn't have words for. I could now say, well, first of all, my nervous system re-regulated, which is understandable because we now know that writing about trauma rather than talking about it can help you get it out without re-triggering the trauma.
Wow.
Yeah. So on a very practical level, I was getting it out. But I was also, the thing that I write at the end when I write is basically a prayer that these thoughts and feelings this fear and resentment would be removed, and I would be shown what is your will for me. And the woman who showed me, at the time, I was like, oh, I hate all that religious crap. She's like, well, you're going to be dead tomorrow, so what difference does it make? And I was like, true enough, okay.
Yeah.
So I put God at the beginning of it, and then I wrote the prayer at the end of asking for it to be removed. And that first, she said, no, the sun was coming up. She said, go home, call me when you wake up and read to me. And I went home, and I did the writing of just getting all the fears and resentments out on paper using, it's a very specific format. I always want to say that. Don't just start dumping. It can make you feel worse. And I'll explain. But I wrote until, I don't know, a couple hours after the sun came up, just crashed with paper and pen in my hand, slept and slept and slept and woke up. And for the first time, and I didn't know how long, I felt okay.
Wow.
I felt peace inside. I was in such distress.
That's so powerful.
Yeah. And within a couple of weeks of continuing that, I was walking on a trail out kind of in nature in a park, and suddenly just I saw it. I was given vision to see that I was part of all living things, and I was absolutely meant to be here. And I experienced myself for a little, I don't know, an afternoon or something, in what I think is the way God understands us, is utterly beautiful, utterly perfect, completely made in God's image. And that all of it was, including the rocks and trees, that we're all like, I was part of it. And if you're part of everything, then it makes no sense to have to take yourself out, does it? You don't need to. There's nowhere to go. And when I had I had, I don't know, probably some guy or something. I was upset about something, and my friend who showed this to me, and I read to her, it's terrible. And she said, and I was like, maybe I should die. She said, all right, well, if you do, though, you're not going to have hands, and then you can't write, and you'll be stuck with this forever in your head. And that scared the bejesus out of me. I was like, no, I got to stay alive. I got to stay alive to keep unpacking this fear and resentment that I've accumulated, which I now understand to be from my own experience. It's also from the collective conscience,
Yeah.
Like, how we all have that, like, our enemies are going to kill us. Come on, let's hate them. That's like encoded, right?
Yeah.
And it generates thoughts. You can't help it. Somebody looks at you wrong on the subway and you're like, oh, those kind of people. They always do that.
I'm so guilty of that. I'm
Yeah.
like, why the fuck are you staring at me?
All of them.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
I know what they're like. That's that. That's just like collective conscience hatred. And so that goes on paper too. And I'm not like a utopian, like we're all going to go to La La Land.
Yeah, yeah.
We're going to have to just deal with this hour by hour, that like ugly seed in the heart, just name it, expressing it on paper, asking for it to be removed, carrying on.
Yeah.
And over time, it gets lighter. In the moment, it buys you a little relief.
Yeah.
You can sleep, you get a moment of peace. But over time, a strength starts to form in you to become who you really are. And finally, at this stage of my life, like who I really am is starting to really show up. I'm here in that capacity now.
Yeah.
Crappy childhood fairy is the expression of like who I've always been, but couldn't be. Yeah.
Absolutely. Question about the childhood stuff, right? So like, is it possible to maybe not have the overwhelming life experiences or the trauma of like sexual assault or abuse or whatever, and still have some remnants of like the PTSD from childhood? Meaning like maybe you grow up in a middle class family, you go to private school, like life on paper looks good, but like your emotional needs aren't met.
Oh yeah.
Right? Like, does that still make sense? Because I think there's a little bit of guilt there, maybe even for myself, hence why I'm asking this, right? Like, it's like, wait, I had a really good childhood, but I do feel like, and of course I didn't know the needs at the time, right? I didn't know my needs weren't being met. As an adult, I could sit here and say, yeah, like I could look back and I have memories of how they weren't met, or I have memories of like being pushed away. But I think there are people out there that are like, I didn't have the assaults and the abuse and that type of stuff, but like I had a really good childhood, but I still feel like I resonate with this.
Yeah, that's all that matters. That's all that matters. I think maybe it's based on Freud or something, but I think the idea that everything we struggle with has to be matched to a childhood experience that counts is kind of bullshit. It's overrated anyway.
Yeah.
And without a doubt, a person who grows up in physical danger because of the neighborhood they're in or because of violence going on in the home, obviously that's going to add to their trauma in significant ways. So if you didn't have that, one of the most potent forms of trauma that affects your nervous system is neglect. And people with any amount of money or food on the table can be guilty of neglect, where you're not meeting that child, you're not holding them, caring for them.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't talked very much about the dysregulation, but dysregulation, like everybody's sort of born dysregulated, and everybody learns to re-regulate eventually. And a lot of how we learn is through that like physical contact with our mother, maybe our father too, holding us, looking us in the eye, talking us through it, letting us feel their nervous system regulated.
Mm-hmm.
And if you didn't get that, if the people holding you were just completely freaked out all the time, they might not have been able to pass on that self-regulation to you. If they were busy, if they were completely upset about something, if they were high or drunk, or they tended to run away from the family, each of those, you keep getting robbed of that contact. And I was talking to a guy on the plane on the way to New York, because this happens all the time. People are like, so what do you do? And I'm like, oh, I'm a YouTuber. And they're like, what?
I'm a YouTuber.
They're like, oh, sure, some middle-aged lady. It's probably some little thing.
You are definitely a YouTuber, though.
I'm definitely a YouTuber.
You are.
Yeah, totally freaked my kids out. But everybody I talk to in the grocery store or whatever who asks and I tell them what I do, they're like, oh, I had that. I'm like, yeah, it's a lot of people do. But I disagree. Not everybody did.
Yeah.
There's like small t trauma. We've all had, horrible things happen. But not all of us had the like nervous system injury that creates a whole new set of symptoms that really interrupts. But of course, all people. Well, I was going to tell you, so a newborn baby, when they're dysregulated, have you held a newborn baby before? Have you seen them cry?
I haven't held fresh out of the womb, but like I've held a baby.
Somewhere in the first...
Yes.
So they cry and they get very rigid and their skin turns red and sweaty and hot and they arch their back and they're just like...
That's a great interpretation.
That's dysregulation.
Yeah.
They're just like, I can't organize myself. My body, everything is just total disorganization.
Yeah.
And so if they are fed and held and given eye contact and talked to, they'll just come right together. They just pull it right together. And I raised two boys, so I got to see this over and over again, and I enjoyed it just every time to see that transformation they would make from just like, can't deal with anything.
Yeah.
I'm scared. I'm like flying through space. And then I would just hold them and bring them back, and they would come back and then they'd sit up and look around and smile, and their eyes were clear. And that's re-regulation. That's what we all do. We do it over and over again. But if you have trauma and if you have that if your nervous system has been affected and it's dysregulated, it's really hard to make that transition or hard to make it when it counts. So you walk in, like in a job or something, and you have to ask for a raise, or even you have to sort of clarify something where you think maybe they thought less of you. Just little things like that. They can dysregulate you.
Yeah.
So you go to talk to the boss, and the next thing you know, you're talking too loud. It's coming.
Yeah.
You're dysregulating. Can't feel your hands. Forget what you were going to say, and then you walk out. Or you say something inappropriate and walk out. Well, I did.
Yeah.
I would just like make terrible mistakes dysregulated. It can make you emotionally dysregulated. You get when you're angry, you get way too angry and scare everyone.
Yeah.
Push them away. When you feel anxious about something like going to a party, you just don't go to the party. It's too much. And so you get a lot of people who are traumatized who are managing their triggers. And when I say trigger, I mean it sets off dysregulation. Being dysregulated, it'll just cost you so much. You can't go to work, or you can't do your job properly. God forbid you drive a bus or something and you're dysregulated. It would be really a problem. You know? And so you just feel like, I can't afford to get dysregulated. I'll just avoid people altogether.
Yeah. Can you regulate at the scene of the crime?
Yes, you can.
You can.
You can, yeah. And
Okay.
that's a really important thing to know, is emergency measures to get re-regulated. Yeah. And it's better still if you have a long-term practice, like my daily practice is something you do morning and afternoon to kind of stay strong, like dental floss,
Dental floss.
Flossing your teeth one time isn't going to
Yeah.
turn around tooth decay, but doing it twice a day forever is going to help you.
Yeah.
So
That's good to know.
Yeah, it's re-regulation. You can do it like an aspirin, which is an emergency measure, or you can do it like dental floss.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
That's good to know. Yeah, I'm always curious, right? Because like, for example, if someone was, sexually abused in their childhood bedroom, right? But like,
Yeah.
and they still live there, are they able to re-regulate in that environment?
God bless.
So you're saying it's possible.
Well, I think somebody who's living in the trauma is at a grave disadvantage.
Okay.
And
good point.
I just feel so bad for kids. I don't really work with kids,
Sure.
but I was a kid, and all the people I work with were kids. And it's so hard when you're helpless to control your circumstances. I grew up in a home that was violent.
Yeah.
And I had to be very shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And like, some of my siblings turned to drugs and alcohol. I turned to being Miss Perfect, and just like,
Yeah,
I'll go out there.
perfectionist. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and getting good grades. Which, if you had to have a trauma adaptation, getting good grades. And I started my first business when I was 9.
There you go, right? Like there
Yeah.
are some benefits to trauma.
Yeah.
That's an important thing to
Yeah.
mention too. There are definitely
Yeah.
benefits to trauma.
A lot of the world's greatest people, greatest leaders and innovators were
I've
traumatized.
experienced trauma, yeah.
Yeah. And, I'm just thinking of Elon Musk right now. He was totally beaten by his dad and berated all the time. And that would be a classic case of somebody who, I don't know, you marshal your forces. You might have other siblings who just fall to pieces.
Yeah.
Different people are different. Yeah. But as an entrepreneur, it was great because we were welfare poor. My mom worked for the school district, and she brought home $1,100 a month. She was a teacher. And teachers' salaries are well known to be not enough for a family to live on. But out of $1,100 take-home pay, $700 was going to drugs or to alcohol and cigarettes and drugs. So we had $400 to live on. We literally didn't have food. And so I learned to network with the neighborhood moms. I learned to babysit. I learned to do yard work. I delivered papers.
Yeah.
I strung Indian jewelry together, for somebody who had a jewelry shop. I sold flowers on street corners. I was just always like hustling for money and looking for that feeling that I was going to be okay. I had to, if I wanted to have, clothes or if I wanted to have lunch other than free lunch. Back in those days, they made you say your number to get your free lunch, and everybody knew you were a free lunch kid. And as a kid, I was so embarrassed.
Yeah, for sure.
And so
I understand.
But it was
that.
92.
Yeah.
I'm going to make it into a shirt one of these days.
Yeah.
92 was my free lunch number, but I didn't want free lunch. I wanted it so bad, actually. It had when you're hungry, sloppy joes are just like,
Yeah.
I want it. But I'd have like 35 cents or something, to get some chips and a milk. And I was probably malnourished the whole time.
So let's talk about, can we share those techniques?
Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about it.
I would love that.
And I want to encourage everybody. You can get the book to get the deep
100%.
training. I also have a free course on my website, crappychildhoodfairy.com, and it's linked everywhere on YouTube called The Daily Practice.
We're going to make sure that we have in the show notes. This is for everyone, right? Whether you're listening on YouTube or you're taking this on the go, in the show notes of this episode, you're going to have all of Anna's socials. You're going to have the link to the book. You're going to have the link to the website, the link to the course, the link to the YouTube. All of that stuff is easily accessible. All you have to do is go to the show notes, no extra work. So we'll make sure that we put that out there.
Yeah. So it's really simple. It's surprisingly simple. It's compatible with anything else you're doing. If you're religious, if you're going to therapy, not everybody has access to that.
Yeah.
Wherever you are, you can pick this up right now and give it a try. And it's very gentle. It's not too terrible. If it ever would feel to people like too much, just don't do it. It's okay. So what it is, and the girl who showed it to me, and I say girl, she was 23 when I was 30. This is who showed it to me. She had been living on the streets of San Francisco as a teenager, and she could no longer hold alcohol down, and therefore it was necessary to become sober. And that was before I met her. And she was, I think, 4 years in AA. And the first 4 years, I think she said, Rachel, she's in my book, she was able to stop drinking, but she was quite miserable with fearful, resentful thinking, basically. And a woman named Sylvia, who historically is one of the people who founded Narcotics Anonymous in LA. And she just died a few years ago. But she showed my friend Rachel something that she had learned from her husband, who learned it from some guy named Robert who disappeared. This is the history of it. And it started here in New York, I believe. And it's derivative of what they tell you in AA, but it's a little bit of a more rigorous approach to certain aspects of it. And they call it the daily steps. So that was how I first learned it. You take out a piece of paper and anything at all to write with, and you write down, if you believe in God, God at the top, God, and you address this higher power. And I would say if people are not God people, you can be in dialogue with your higher self. I don't have a higher self. I'm just stuck with me, I'm not very good at this, but I really want to assist people wherever they are. So at the top of the page, you begin to list, I have fear. I have fear, and you complete the sentence. And so we're not going into some deep list that you would give for a therapist or an essay. It's just like right now, fear this pillow is crooked, and fear I might be slumping over a little bit. Fear I look slouchy. Fear I want to look great on the podcast, right? That's literally, if I were to just stop and go, what's causing me worry or agitation right now? And then, there's usually a mix of very serious things, trivial things, things from the past, things from the future.
How many things are we talking?
Well, you write until you feel better. So I've had days where I had to write 10 pages, and other days like today, it was like both sides of a piece of 8.5 by 11 line paper that I had lying around. And then I wrote again on the subway because I had fear that I wasn't going to find, like I'd never been here before, and fear I'd be late, and fear, I told you my breakfast went bad, and I was like, hey, can you get me something to eat when I get there? And you did, thank you. So, but I had to like deal with that thought because it was preoccupying me. And so I can write as much as I want during the day, but twice a day minimum. And if I notice I'm resentful about something, and occasionally I'm not resentful about something, but we're talking about taking all negative emotions and putting them in two basic buckets. And one is like the anxious variety, we call it fear, and the angry variety, resentment. And so then I was resentful because something made me late this morning. And I was supposed to get this email out, but nobody got me the thing. And then it turned out it was because of this and so. And I was resentful. So when I was on the subway, I had to like come back to writing about it. I'm resentful at the person who I'm blaming in my mind, true or not, about it, because I have fear they didn't get me the email draft in time. Fear I won't have time to do that today. Fear we just went way off schedule with our email marketing plan. Fear, all the worries that I have in my head. I'm sure you have that where you have a lot of worries and all you're thinking about is all this stuff you can't really do anything with.
Yeah.
And so I got that written and I stopped, and then I was like, oh, I'm on the subway. Oh, we're at 7th Avenue. I got to get off. So that's very good. I can attend to like right now and pay attention to where am I going, and stop being so preoccupied about this email I'm not going to deal with until tonight. So that's very simple. But I've also had to deal with it a lot. Let's say you're having a difficult relationship, and I know a lot of people who listen to this podcast are in a relationship, hoping to have a relationship, dealing with a breakup. So you're going to have a lot of like fear and resentment about that. Resentment at the person, resentment at the people who are perceived to have been the cause of the problem. And I just say perceived. They may have been. We call it a fear, whether it's literally happened or whether we suspect. So like I get really resentful at the United States Postal Service. I talk about it because we all use it. And if you live in another country, you have a postal service. Yeah. But at the house I used to live in, the mailman would never say hello back to me. And we never, like half the stuff that we were expecting never came. And then I was afraid of shipping anything. So I was just constantly resentful at the United States Postal Service, the whole damn thing, like, whoa. And I would write about it because it's just not a very good use of my energy and thought, to be dwelling on it. If I'm going to do something about it, great. But, it's like, okay, so go to UPS, whatever. Deal with it. So, but it helps me to show the format. I have fear I never got that letter. Fear it's from the IRS, and fear IRS will think that I didn't respond, and fear I'll get a penalty, and fear this will cause me to get audited. And, there's just like this whole like chain of fears that I have. I'm resentful and then, what? As a matter of fact, I'm resentful at the post office because I have fear. So this is the innovation of what we write. In my mind, I'm resentful at the post office because they never deliver anything. But when I'm writing, I add in this phrase, because I have fear. I'm resentful at the post office because I have fear they don't deliver everything.
Yeah.
And the reason we say that is complicated and mysterious, but we say it to just put a little distance between what we're believing to be the case. You know, my mind will always believe the world's out to get me. The post office doesn't care. The government doesn't care. The people on the subway don't care. They're just out to get me. It's just not a very good thought, not very productive. And so I'm resentful because I have fear, Now, the whole thing that got me to have to heal, that got me so down that I had to find some kind of solution for what turned out to be my trauma symptoms was I got attacked on the street by 4 guys. They beat me unconscious. This really happened. It factually happened. The police saw it. There's a whole thing. There's a little article in the newspaper, very tiny. But they just jumped out of nowhere and beat me up. 4 men kicking my head and face till my jaw was broken and my teeth were broken. And I woke up and I survived and I dealt with it. But that's what gave me PTSD bad enough that my childhood PTSD got out of the bag. And so I was learning this technique right as this happened, right after this happened. I'm resentful at those guys because I have fear they beat me up. They did beat me up. It's very consequential. But I'm resentful at these guys because I have fear. And let's just look at that for a minute. You know, why are we even referencing the fear? I have fear I'm never going to be okay. Fear, I couldn't read or use a phone for like a month. I was so like mentally like scattered. I have fear the world's going to hell in a handbasket. I have fear this whole town is just like yielding to criminals. Fear the police don't care. Fear the newspaper only said this little amount. Fear the police says this happens all the time, but it's not reported. Fear there's a big lie going on. Fear I'm going to lose my job. Fear I almost did lose my job when I was in that state. I became very dysregulated and was saying inappropriate things and almost lost my job. So some of my fears were pretty legitimate. Some of them were fantastical. Fear this is happening because I should have never stayed alive. You know, I'm not meant to be here. So some of my fears are just projections. Yeah. And some of them are just, I just have fear this is really happening. But where's the line? Who knows? What's real and what's not real. I can get free of all of it. And then I am empowered to do some things differently if I would like to. When you have freedom from all these fearful and resentful thoughts, the choices begin to appear in front of you. You can't see choices because of trauma and also because of that mental, emotional overwhelm. So then you write this thing at the end, I'm now ready, and ask you to remove these fears and resentments. And that I learned from my 12-step friend. And I pray only for knowledge of your will for us and the power to carry it out. Love, Anna. That's like from 12-step work. And people can adapt that a little bit to say, I am now ready to fully release all of this. I seek to know, my best purpose today and what I should be doing. So that's the spirit of it. I do want to be free of this stuff, and I want to know and be who I'm meant to be. And that's a very powerful intention to express or pray. Yeah. Very, very powerful. And it will start to happen immediately. And so there's a lot of change that can begin to happen at last when that's your focus. And it's very different. I used to be a lot of people are. If we all go through it, like people get assaulted on the street, right? There's so many ways you could take that and so many things that you could do as a result. And I think the world is meant to have a variety of people doing a variety of things about our common problems. What shall we do about crime? Some people will turn to the law. Some people will learn martial arts. Some people will join an advocacy organization. Some people will do marches. Some people will just go back into their house and just hate everyone and only deal with their pets. And so we want the fruitful ways of dealing with this, as different as they might be. And we'll argue about the best way to do it, which is right and proper for human beings to debate how to do this from our different points of view. But the worst thing we can do is retreat and give up and just take it on and let it give us a heart attack. Yeah, absolutely. Or, God forbid, go out and start hurting people too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I appreciate you sharing that. And then furthermore, once you write, you said that you go into a meditation.
So after we write, we go into meditation, and I went and learned transcendental meditation.
Nice.
It's very nice, and it fits nicely. If people would rather do something different, they can. I just recommend that it be very simple. It's
Yeah.
unless you already have a meditation practice that you're very grooved into and you do all the time, probably best not to do something that's super demanding, like it's an hour long or you have
Yeah.
to sit a certain way, or there's an idea like you have to focus on your breath the whole time. If you have PTSD, you are not going to focus on your breath the whole time or even be free of thoughts. That can't be a problem.
Yeah.
So it's just okay. You take a rest. And I do TM, so it's a mantra.
Yeah.
I do my best with it, but a lot of times I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I forget sometimes I'm meditating, so I do that twice a day. And then sometimes it doesn't really feel like anything, but the act of doing it regularly changes everything.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it feels great. Last night I did it with my friend before dinner.
That's cool.
And I was pretty tired. I've been, it's like my free day in New York. We were running around trying to do everything. And by the time I got to her house, I'm like, why did we come all the way to Queens? I'm so tired.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I came out of meditation just like ready to go and having a nice time. So you get refreshed again, like the little baby who sits up and is like, I'm here.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's powerful. When someone picks up the new book, Re-Regulated, and again, just letting you know that it's in the show notes of this episode, simple link click and you're there. When someone picks up that book and they read it from front to back, maybe they do it twice, what is the one thing you want them to take away from it?
That healing is possible. I mean, a lot of people have given up and they're self-medicating or they're just angry. And I'm like, healing is possible. Wait. Everything they told you before about what you were supposed to do, I bet you were a good boy or girl and you tried it and you did everything you were supposed to do. And if it didn't help you, there is something so much else that you can do and that you can have in your own hands. And you can do it on the subway. You can do it at work when they think you're working on something else, unless you're driving a bus.
Unless you're driving a bus, yeah.
It's the highest productivity thing I ever did for my work was to start writing at work.
Yeah.
And at first covertly. Then when I became a video producer, that was the deal. It's like, we will work till 5, but at 5 we stop because Anna has to write and meditate.
Yeah.
And it's funny when you get to a point in life where you know what you need to be well and people just respect it. So it was decades to get to that point. And so yeah, you have tools at your disposal. There's 2 things I believe you need to heal. And one is you need tools that work for you. And the other is you need people who get it. And some people are lucky enough to find that in a therapist, but even if they did, that's just one person and that's just like one visit a week. You need people in your life who get it. And so I think a lot of people who go to 12-step fellowships, they have found that there. Some people get that in church groups or I have friends who do martial arts and it's like a community and they see people and they're doing something very physically re-regulating and that can be positive. Maybe they're not talking about it. Most of us, though, we end up hanging out with friends and like bitching about things. And that'll just take you right back down into dysregulation. The worst thing anybody can do to me is agree with my resentful little stories about how terrible everything is and be like, yeah, I know, it sucks so much. And so I love my friends who also do this because in the gentlest way that it never feels like criticism, they just won't go there with me when I'm like, got my little resentful story. I love resentful stories. Who doesn't? They're delicious. And when everybody will go, I know, men suck. I know. Why can't we all just avoid them? That's the sort of conversation I used to have.
Yeah.
And it just makes you feel terrible.
That it does.
It's not real. It's not a solution. And it just bypasses this thing where it's like, yeah, well, what am I doing with the guy who's making me feel so upset? What is it about me that feels compelled to that? And being that, as we've established, the why is often a mystery.
Yeah.
Just like, what can I do to change course? So a lot of what I teach are practical guidelines to start changing your life. Once you know how to deal with all that angst inside through these techniques, you can then start making choices about what to do. And so that's where it gets into the trauma-driven behaviors. The like chronic dishonesty, black and white thinking, attraction to unavailable people, addictions. There are just these common patterns that all human beings can fall into. Traumatized people fall into it a little more often, a little deeper. And you can start to work on those things and change what you did. So I've made it a theme, like some of the bad relationship choices I've made. I had a total turning point in my life when this guy died and I had kids. And I knew that I could never again bring that kind of trouble into our lives of a guy on heroin, never. And I felt hopeless. Like, I don't even know how this happened. I don't know what's wrong with me. And I was just like face down on the floor crying, praying, God, if you're real, you better help me because I'm going to ruin everything. And I don't even know why. I don't even know what I'm doing wrong. And things started to come together for me. And I had stopped doing my daily practice for a couple years before that happened. Clue. And I took that up again. And I started going to Al-Anon meetings, which is appropriate when you've had a person die of drugs. And my brother died of heroin, by the way, too. It's just been this chronic
So
pattern.
it runs deep, yeah.
It does. And it's a mystery, like, why?
Yeah.
I don't know why, but there's these problems I'm having. And then a friend, I sought out a couple of mentors, powerful mentors who I was intimidated by because I knew they'd say, I'll help you if you are willing to, actually like stop doing some certain things you're doing.
Yeah.
And I was finally willing to do absolutely anything for this to change for the sake of my kids. And this one mentor, he said, he was a friend who had known me for years. He had seen me through. He knew that I was both really smart and capable and delightful in many ways, and that I kept making self-destructive choices around relationships. And he said, I want you to write down what you want, what you really want in your life and in a partner, and like completely. And I wrote it down. And then he taught me to stop trying to make it happen, the relationship thing to happen. And I didn't date at all for a couple of years. I was just sitting there kind of in a spiritual and productive place and becoming present for my kids and not having problems in my life. And then the first time that I dated anybody really was my now husband.
Wow.
Because I had written down what I wanted, and I was very specific about so many things. I was sure when I wrote it down, this will exclude everyone. But I was like, that's okay.
Yeah.
For my kids, that's okay. I'll exclude everyone.
Yeah.
I'll do whatever it takes. But then, I saw him. I met him in an Al-Anon meeting, and he was a really like positive and happy guy, and he was always there to put out the chairs for everybody and always helpful and always giving an encouraging word. And I didn't think much about him. And then one day it entered my mind like how awesome he was.
Yeah.
and it took a very long time before, we talked, before it turned into a date, and then I had already decided I have to be very straight with him. I don't want to date anybody. Like, I'm a single mom, and I'm not going to date anybody where there's not the potential that this would turn into a marriage with somebody completely great for my kids. And so I'm just telling you now, so there's the door, I know, like, I just was like so willing to quit the bullshit.
Yeah.
And he said, well, I'm open to it. And we just had this very slow relationship. And the friend who was mentoring me helped me be very slow, very clear. And just like old rules, like my now husband, when we were dating, I was feeling anxious that he wasn't that into me. I wasn't sure. He called me on a Saturday at 5:00 to see if I wanted to hang out. And on the advice of my friend, I said, sorry, I'm busy. Now, what I was busy doing was just feeling like, oh, I don't get to go out with him. I really wanted to. I thought he'd call sooner. But I just said no. And I remember he was like, oh, he was really taken aback. And from then on, he would call her, earlier in the week.
Yeah.
Respect my time. Just old-fashioned stuff like that. So around relationships, a lot of people who have trauma have attachment wounds. And they will ruin your relationships. They will push you towards people who are no good for you. This like insecure attachment. It's just like, somebody's cute and I feel attracted and they kind of like me, and you just like latch on. And then if you have abandonment wounds too, it's double bad because now you can't leave. The minute you sleep with them, you're just like bonded for life.
Yeah.
And then the next morning you're just like, I don't even like this person. This was a big mistake.
Yeah.
But you're bonded for life. And then that's how people stay. I'll speak for myself. It'll keep you in a bad situation for a long time. So I was just like, I'm not going to sleep with anybody for a very long time. I can't activate my attachment wound right now. I just need to get to know you. He was like, perfect. That's where I am in my life.
Wow.
And What are the odds that the only guy I would have been interested in would be also interested in a very slow courtship? What are
There
the
you
odds?
go.
So I think we had somebody looking out for us.
I love that. As we all do, right? As
Yeah.
we all do, whether we believe it or not.
Yeah.
Well, Anna, I'm going to ask you one last question here. We spent a lot of time together. And I'm really grateful for this again.
Thank you.
This is the last question I always ask. If you made it to whatever year you want to live to, you publish as many books as you want. I know you're working on number 2. We're going to have you back for a second conversation when that's ready. You impact as many people. Whatever it is that you want to do is done. But when I think of Anna, I could only remember you for one piece of advice. So this is the advice that would pop in my mind, and I'm like, oh, yep, that was Anna, right? What is the piece of advice you want to leave people with?
A very hard time narrowing it down.
Okay.
This is what it's like to write a book. You have so much going on in your head. Trauma is an injury, not an identity.
That's freaking good.
Mm-hmm.
Why is trauma an injury and not an identity?
Well, when bad things happen, we do tend to take it on as who we are, and it holds us down. There's a lot of things I could tell you about. Like growing up poor, I really I felt that I was white trash, and that everybody who looked at me would think, "Oh, she's white trash," and I wouldn't try for things. I would shy away from opportunities, and it's an injury. I felt bad about myself because I was like a car that was missing a cylinder, and it can be repaired. It can be repaired, and everything can get better. And the injury can be repaired, and this whole idea that you have to talk about the past may have been a misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Or that if you did it and for enough years, I mean, it really did seem like this. If we just talk and talk and talk and talk for more years, eventually there'll be this breakthrough.
Yeah.
It's like maybe there's a way you can start feeling better today, and there is, and that's what I teach.
I love that. Well, Anna, I want to say thank you again. I have enjoyed this conversation
Thank you.
so much. It's like I wish we can keep it going. You are incredible. I'm super grateful for the work that you put out into the world. Super grateful for this opportunity, obviously, to be able to amplify it further for the individual, you, the person watching this, the person listening to this. Just want to remind you that the links to socials for Anna, the book, courses, website, YouTube, all of that good stuff is in the show notes of this episode. I also want to bring you back to the beginning of this, right? If you're listening to this now, I could make the radical assumption that you found this to be of value in some way, shape, or form. Maybe it was entertaining. Maybe it was exactly what you needed. Maybe it was a golden nugget. Whatever it was, you're still here with us. You're still rocking with us. So I'm bringing you back to the beginning when I said that you were here for a reason because you could have been doing anything else in this world. So I'm going to ask you to make sure that you're sharing this with the people that are in your life. There are people that need to hear what was discussed here today. You have the power to do that for them. You have the opportunity to make an impact just the way that Anna does, the same exact way. So I'm calling you to make sure that you're sharing this with at least 3 people, whether that means that you're going to put it on social media, whether that means that you are going to directly text it to someone, whatever it may be. I'm putting it on your mind and on your heart to make sure that you are sharing this. Until next time, everyone, be blessed. Peace.